Hi everyone, I'm Katie Watson and welcome back to another episode of Cybersecurity in Focus. Today's episode is a little bit different because we're not starting with a breach inside a business. Instead, we're starting with what happens when cyber criminals hit real people. Individuals, families, and sole traders who suddenly find themselves overwhelmed, scared, and not sure where to turn. I'm joined by Rory Innes, who spent his entire career in cybersecurity. Rory is the founder and the CEO of the Cyber Helpline, a charity he established in 2018 to provide free, expert support to individuals and sole traders affected by cybercrime, digital fraud, and online harm. Rory's work has also been widely recognised too, including the Alan Turing Award, the National Cyber Awards, a Points of Light Award, and more. In this conversation, Rory and I talk about the reality of supporting victims, why so many cases are deeply human and not just technical, how employers can better support their staff who experience incidents in their personal lives, and why we need a shared framework for understanding online harm in the way we do for corporate cyber attacks. There's so much to learn from this episode, and I'm so glad we recorded it. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hey, Rory, thank you so much for joining me today on the Cybersecurity in Focus podcast. It is great to have you here.
Really happy to be here. Looking forward to the chat.
Okay, so I think for full transparency, Rory and I kind of started chatting already before we got into this and we realized how interesting this topic is. And I was like, we must hit record. So, Rory, do you want to just give a little bit of context to what the Cyber Helpline is and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Rory Innes. I founded the Cyber Helpline around 9 years ago now. And we're a charity, but fundamentally we are a movement by the cybersecurity infosec community to step in and fill some of the gap in support for victims of cybercrime and online harm. So we really focus on individuals, families, sole traders, when they've had cybercrime, a digital fraud, or an online harm happen online. We connect them with cybersecurity expertise and help them recover and learn from their experience. So think about us as an instant response service for the general public.
I think what you do is incredible and it's so needed at this point in time. And I think it'd be really interesting to start with, how did you come about? How did you start doing this?
So I was working in cybersecurity companies. My background had been in kind of managed security services, instant response, and we would help big banks and big retailers. But we'd also sometimes get individuals contact us and say, I've got an issue, can you help? And when you're sitting in a big instant response firm or managed services security firm, you're not set up to deal with that. It's not who you're focused on. And we used to say, hey, just go to the police and you'll get help. And over time, those people would come back and say, I haven't heard or haven't got this resolved. Like, what should I do? And I kind of sat back at that time. This is around 2017, 2018, and said, that can't be right. There must be support out there for individuals when this happens. And just coincidentally, at the same time, the National Cybersecurity Centre released its first kind of national strategy for cyber. And I remember it's an 88-page document, and I thought, right, this will be interesting. What are we going to do for individuals? How does that fit into this landscape? And I read that 88-page document, and there was pretty much one sentence on individuals. And it said something like, individuals must take personal responsibility for their own online security in the same way they have to take personal responsibility for their physical belongings. And that was pretty much it. Now, there's lots in that plan which was going to have a positive impact for individuals. You protect the country, the government, the critical national infrastructure. There's loads of positive things. But in terms of how do we help individual victims, there wasn't really anything. So that was kind of the point of me saying the cybersecurity community is perfectly placed. There's lots of us. We're good people. We do a lot of volunteering. We love a mission and we've got the skills. So why don't we get together and see if we can help some people? So that was kind of the starting point of the idea behind the charity.
That's fantastic. And what was the point then in starting the charity that you really thought, wow, this is something that could really help a lot of people?
Yeah, and I think the kind of assumption we had at the time is let's put a website up, let's have a kind of contact us form and see if we can actually help people. Like, can our technical skills and experience make a difference? And I think really early on, we realized that all of the planning we had done on the types of issues people would come with was completely wrong. Like, completely wrong. we had envisaged all these quite technical issues that we might deal with. But actually, you forget that for individuals, it's often their lives wrapped up in technology that goes wrong, whether it's a breakup in a relationship that leads to harassment or stalking, whether it's intimate image abuse in a relationship, whether it's looking for a job and job fraud, romance scams, all of these really kind of human life issues playing out online. And that also meant that as we were starting to work with these individuals and help them, and we understood the impact we were having on their lives, of the impact on their mental health, the impact on their online confidence, their ability to get back to their day-to-day life and move on. That's when we realized, actually, if we can remove the lack of technical understanding and that kind of technical barrier to them recovering, then we can do something really special here. Now, there was loads of work to get from where we were to where we are now, but we understood that there was a massive impact. And the thing we kept hearing really early on, you're the first person or first people we've spoken to who understand what I'm explaining. They understand the technology, they understand what the options might be. They're not telling me I've got a mental health issue or I should just change my password. Like, you really understand and you've got options. And they just felt, you could see the kind of load removed from their shoulders at that point as they were like, okay, I've got a chance of getting some proper help here, which was really, really motivating for us.
So you don't completely avoid the technical aspect, but you marry it up with the human aspect, because there's still a technical element to it because of the nature of what it is, but there is still that human. Like, how do you find balancing those two things?
It's really interesting that, because we open around 3,000 cases a month.
Okay.
We have another maybe 25,000 people come every month to our kind of self-help guide. So we've got a really good feel for the types of issues people are experiencing online. And also about a third of people who come to our service have reported to the police. So we see a lot of stuff that's not being reported. About half of what we deal with is digital fraud. And that, there's a lot of social engineering in that. Obviously, some of the kind of technical tradecraft isn't that complex, but there is technical elements to that. There's then about 20% of our caseload is really technical. It's ransomware, it's malicious software, it's hacked devices, it's trackers, whatever the kind of technology is. Then the remaining 30% is this online harm space where it's really human issues like cyber stalking, like online harassment, like intimate image abuse. What's really interesting is that technology is involved in all of those things to various different levels. But we understand that technology and we've prepared for how to respond to that technology. But what we hadn't considered really early on was the type of people and skill set that we would need to provide the help. So you kind of think about, technical, the Cyber Helpline, technical kind of support. I love the cybersecurity community to death, but it's not always well known for its soft skills and people skills. And so we had to be really careful about where we had really deep technical expertise that we could use and access, but also where we had a mix of technical understanding with really good people skills and listening skills and empathy skills, where we could provide that front of service support. So really important for us is speaking in plain English, non-technical language that anyone can understand, going at the pace of the individual and making it really clear what is happening. Because that's the thing you don't think of. It's really confusing for people when they come to you. They don't come to you and say, I'm experiencing a sextortion attack with a compromised email account. They come and say, this is happening, I don't know what's going on, how did I get here? And so being able to break that down for them, take them on that journey, empower them to be part of the solution has been a really important part of the charity as well.
It's so interesting, because it seems so simple, but I can imagine when you are in that situation, most of us, when anything ever goes wrong, brain power goes out the window. You don't know, and it's freeze and panic. And I think to know there's somewhere like the Cyber Helpline to go is super important. From, a lot of the listeners to this podcast, we work in organizations, we work on IT teams and cyber teams. What recommendations and advice would you give them when it comes to employees and employees being scared of having a cyber attack? Because I don't know if you've seen a lot more fear around it. I've certainly seen it with my friends. I've never had friends talk to me about cybercrime really until the last year and it comes up at the pub. So
Yeah.
what kind of advice would you give to those businesses and those business owners or CISOs or heads of IT when it comes to communicating to normal employees, what to do if you get a cyber attack on your individual self?
Yeah, I think that is really interesting because it's entered into the kind of zeitgeist of the time, hasn't it? It's true crime and catfishing documentaries, and people are much more aware of it as a topic and as an issue. So I guess there's a couple of things I would say to people in those positions. One, really be mindful of the data that you have and the impact it can have on individuals if it's lost. And one of the things I love about our volunteers is if you come in and you're on the front line supporting victims, you really understand how data about individuals that ends up out in the wild can really cause harm. And so you really do learn the value of protecting that data privacy of individuals. And I think that what's really important to understand as an organization, if you have a breach and you lose employee data, you lose customer data, it's not enough to notify and say, hey, change your passwords, because actually the risk for them downstream of identity theft, of all sorts of other things, is really high. And I think we need to think much more about how we support the end user, the staff member, whoever's data has been involved about that. I also think that people are really interested in these topics now. And I think that if you're going to train somebody on how to have good security hygiene in an organization, probably the best way to do that now is talk to them about how to protect their kids or their parents or how to protect their personal life. Because I've been into a million organizations and done presentations on, what we see. The first question is always, hey, I've got a 14-year-old daughter or a 15-year-old boy, what can I do? And I think if you can engage in that really human conversation with them about how to talk to people, what to do if there's an incident, is really important. And then the last thing I would say is where everyone's obsessed with proactive advice, and it's really good because we want to avoid incidents as much as possible. So let's tell people, 3 random words in your password, 2-factor, and that is really good. And we need to get that message across. But ultimately, in England and Wales alone in the last year, there were 5 million victims. So we also need to be ready to support those 5 million victims when something goes wrong. And so thinking about what happens if a staff member comes to you and says, I'm being cyberstalked in my personal life, what can you do to support? How can you de-risk their cyber stalking from a work perspective? And also understanding that probably every year, 1 in 10 of your staff have a personal security incident, which may or may not pose a risk for you as an organization. So all of these things, think about the business and think about the business assets, but don't forget about the people and their personal lives and what happens in the event of an incident.
Wow, I didn't even realize the numbers were that high, 1 in 10. That is shocking.
It's huge. We look at this every year based on kind of Home Office, police and crime data. We look at that kind of reporting numbers to us. England and Wales alone, there were 1.7 million people who reported some sort of online crime. So it's 58% of crime in England and Wales. So it's the majority of crime is cyber enabled in some way. We know that about a third report. So that number we think of total victims is about 5 million. Everyone I say that to in the industry says that feels a bit low. We can kind of get to that number just in England and Wales. And so I think, everyone I speak to has suffered from a cyber incident personally, or they know someone who has, or they've almost suffered a cyber incident. And so it's just something that we live with day to day now. But conversely, something we haven't caught up with from a victim support, from a law and regulation, from a police and criminal justice side of how we actually respond to this, bring perpetrators to justice and support victims at the same time. So we're lagging behind the issue in a big way.
Yeah, I think technology has definitely evolved so quickly in things like the justice system and how we operate as a society, expectations, how we function, like cultural change. That can take a lot longer. I think something you said about how you're helping people to kind of operate online safely again, feel more comfortable. I think that's something I've definitely seen going into organizations, talking to employees about cybersecurity is almost like anxiousness or a fear around being online. And I mean, I've even made the just going to switch everything off and go live on a remote island joke, but
Yeah.
that's not possible. Like, I amount of technology I use on the same day. For those of us who, maybe feel anxious now about technology, about like, you're approaching this thing with fear because of all the headlines, all the stories. Do you have any advice on that and that psychological approach to technology?
I think, first of all, it's sad, isn't it? Like, the internet is great. Like, technology is great. Like, there's so many positive, inspiring, amazing use cases for technology. And there's 150 people in this charity, and we all love technology. We're all in the technology industry. Often when I think about this, and I think, people who are worried about responding to emails or worried about trusting these things, I think, oh, it's so sad that we've got to this point where the misinformation, the risk has started to dominate the
Yeah.
conversation. But I think we've allowed it to happen. So I think there's two things there. I think, imagine a world where we were still selling cars without seatbelts or airbags or MOTs and all of these things that we put in place. Or, we were selling food in restaurants without any food safety standards or expiry dates. It just wouldn't happen. You get into selling cars long enough, people die, people crash, people get hit by cars. So you think, well, maybe we should have lights on these things. Maybe we should have seatbelts. Maybe we should have a horn so we can warn people around us. Maybe people should have a license so we know who they are. And, all of these things that you put in place. And I think what's been really sad in a way is that we've been too slow to put some of those protections in place that would have made it feel less risky and would have created some safer places for people. And I can totally understand it because if you're not technical at all, which most people aren't, most people are good users of the devices, but they're not technical, the unknown and the inaccessibility of how you might problem solve creates the fear in that scenario. If you're an expert in instant response, you're probably not that nervous about being online because you think, well, I'll be able to handle this if it happens. But for most people, they can. And also, for most people who do suffer an incident, there isn't really quick, ready help available to you.
Yeah.
The social media platform doesn't have a helpline. You can't phone and speak to someone. You're going to get an auto response. If you report to the police, you might never hear back or get an auto response in 28 days. Like, there's no, am I doing the right thing here? Is there any risk? So I just think it's sad. I think that technology is great. And I think we need to catch up with the controls and the regulation that makes people feel safe online. And then I think that that's where we have a big role to play, not just in supporting people who are worried they've experienced an incident or they have a live incident, but also how can we use our experience, our data, our insight to try and convince governments, to try and convince tech platforms, to try to influence regulation, to drive change in this space in the first place, so
Yeah.
that you don't get people who go online and think, oh, is something bad going to happen here? I want to buy this thing, but am I going to get scammed? Like, that shouldn't be the default position. In the same way, you shouldn't walk out on the street and think, am I going to be a victim of crime today? Like, that should not be
Yeah.
your default position. So there's lots of work to do to flip that around, I think.
Yeah, and there's so many different components as you're discussing. There's, the regulation side, the technology platforms themselves, their ownership. And then there is that element of, I think, as well, organizations and supporting their employees. And you only briefly touched on it, but there is that mental health aspect. And there's twofold. You've got, as an employer, you want your employees to feel safe. They don't feel
Yeah.
safe online. And you also want to be able to be there and let them know where to go if something does go wrong. And I think so for those employers who maybe have had someone come to them and say they've got a victim of sextortion and they don't know what to do, like you said, I think you said it before the call, you don't get taught this when you study cybersecurity. You don't get taught what to do when someone comes to you saying, this has happened to me. Should they direct people to you at the Cyber Helpline? What kind of advice can they offer? What kind of things can they give them?
Yeah, I think this was a really important learning for us when we founded the charity. That just because you're technical, just because you work in cybersecurity, maybe you've dealt with 100 corporate incidents, and just because you have all of that behind you doesn't mean you know how to guide someone through a cyber stalking case or a
Yeah.
sex trafficking case or a revenge porn case. These are really complex issues that have technology in them, but also have real physical and kind of mental health risks for the service user. And so we've had to do a lot of work, not just on how do we build the charity and the service and all the component parts so we can run it, but what is the official response pathway for cyberstalking?
Yeah.
And that was really interesting for us because we really early on, we got lots of cyber stalking cases come in, and we would go to stalking charities and say, hey, how do you deal with this online bit? And they were kind of tell people to change their passwords and do these things. And over time, we kind of understood actually that's not great advice, because if you change your password and the stalker can no longer access your email account or social media account and how they were accessing your information, you might escalate the problem and make it more risky. So with all of these cases, it's about taking the right action at the right time within an understanding of the risk for the individual. So I think if someone comes to you and says, hey, my email account has been hacked, and you're a cybersecurity professional, you can probably think really quickly, well, I can get you back into your email account and change your password and turn on two-factor. But you're probably not taking a step back and thinking, is this individual in an abusive relationship and it's her partner who's hacked the email account, and if she changes the password, she might go home and have a domestic incident? Is there something else going on here that we're not aware of that might be risky? Could this be a stalker? Is there sensitive content in that email account that might then be shared as intimate images? So there's all of these things that we've learned over time from being in this space with individuals, that it's about not jumping into the technical controls and the technical response. It's about understanding the landscape, the risk, and then taking the appropriate action at the right time. And also being really mindful of where's the handover point to the police and where might they want to see that compromise in place before we reverse it out so they can collect evidence and all these factors. So if someone comes to you for help them. But I think that we're at a point now where we've understood actually there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of best practice and learnings that we've got. Either come and talk to us and we can help you with that, and then you can go and help your partner, your mum and dad, your son or daughter, whoever it is, or send them to us and we will provide that expert help. Because these issues can be really simple, but they can also be really, really complex. So it's about trying to understand what kind of case you're dealing with.
I think as well that just a testament to what you've built with the Cyber Helpline, and you've done all the learnings of it. You've built something where people can get those proper pathways to support and also talk to someone. I can imagine it could feel, especially if you've never spoke to someone who's been a victim of cybercrime and then you're a victim of cybercrime, I can imagine there's a lot of emotions that come with it as well. We always think, I would never fall for that. I wouldn't be catfished, or I would never, that would never be me. But I can imagine that it's probably more likely than you think it is that you can catch yourself in those situations.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not uncommon that we are supporting someone who's got a technical background, but maybe the compromise has not been technical.
Yeah.
The compromise has been about them as a human being, and it's led to other kind of technical or privacy kind of compromise. And I think that ultimately this is all about people. And in some ways we were talking earlier about the responsibilities on social media companies and government and everything. But there's also a responsibility on people just to be nicer to each other and to act better online. And a lot of what we deal with is just really bad behavior being carried out online. It's harassment. It's a bad relationship breakup, and then someone sends intimate images. It's just really poor, horrendous human behavior. And so some of it, unfortunately, is also just human nature and things playing out online. But I do really think that we can provide help to these individuals and we can do the right things and have the right things in place to respond. But we can't keep looking at this space and saying, that's too hard. The cyber criminals are in a different country. There's too many victims. These social media companies, they're American, so they're kind of outside of our, we have to sit down and say, right, it's 58% of crime. We are bringing almost zero perpetrators to justice. We don't fundamentally have a proper victim support framework for victims in this space, we need to start getting to solutions and getting to a safer internet and safer online world. And we need to get there much, much quicker because, as you said, technology is also changing really quickly. And we've really seen that impact of generative AI and the ability to create
Yeah.
videos and also images. And, the old advice about, catfishers, send me a live video of you doing this and that will prove you're real. I can create that in 3 seconds,
Yeah.
on a large language model now. So it's getting harder and harder to deal with these things.
I guess some people as well might not even realize that how easy that is to do. When you work in technology and you see technology every day, it's so much easier to think like you can do it in a couple of seconds. And then someone who thinks they're doing the right thing is actually putting themselves in a vulnerable position. And so in those instances, I guess, is what are kind of the latest things on how to, that you said like a while back, best thing to do is talk to someone about how to protect, their 14-year-old, 15-year-old kid online. I can't imagine when I was growing up, people just started getting phones at school and we just started social media. But now I've got like little cousins online, and how do you keep them safe? Like maybe that's the question, because that old advice of get them to send you a photo, and that can easily be mimicked now.
Yeah, I think the conversation has changed. And I think because of the technology and because of the power of the technology in a child's hands, it is really different, their access. I mean, I'm so happy that I grew up pre kind of internet age. And I got a phone when I went to university, but it sent text messages and I could play Snake on it. And that was pretty much it. So, now there's 8-year-olds out there with supercomputers in their hands, essentially. I think the best advice often is, again, it's the human stuff rather than the technical stuff. And there is lots of technical stuff out there, and I would encourage all parents to think about parental controls, to think about the security of the devices, and also really encourage them to think about access to those devices at key times, like at night in their bedroom and other kind of risky scenarios like that. But the key thing we see time and time again, and we have lots of children come to use the service, and it's that they don't feel they can go and tell their parents.
Yeah.
And that is a totally natural response. Like if you said to me, as a 13-year-old boy, you've got this issue, you should phone the police. Not in a million years am I going to phone the police and have a conversation with them. Or you should go and tell your teacher. Not in a million years. But I think if you can have that conversation with children at the right age to say, hey, look, if something happens online, something that makes you uncomfortable, someone's telling you to do something you don't want to do, or you're not sure about, you can come and talk to me and you won't get in trouble, or we'll problem solve it together. That open channel of communication is really important, because what we see is the time from them getting into that incident, they've shared an intimate image or whatever it is, to actually getting an adult's help is where all the bad stuff happens. And so if you can just open that channel of communication, have that open environment, and have the controls in place, that's probably as good as you're going to get, because they're just going to have to deal with like going out in the world, there's risk out there. They're going to have to learn to deal with it. But that open channel of communication and the baseline kind of security, hygiene, protection stuff, that goes a long way, I think.
I think it's really interesting hearing you answer about this using words like incident, controls. And it's so fascinating because it's the language of cybersecurity, but it's within the context of everyday personal life. And I think that's really highlighting the gap we have in society now, the gap that is missing. There is a whole world and whole collections of communities who understand this stuff for what it is. When that incident happens, you need to respond quickly. It's the time that take, like, that is very familiar to what I always hear about phishing. So, when you've
Yeah.
clicked on that link, it's the time it take, you need to alert your IT team. And I
Yeah.
think what we've done in organizations is build these great processes and procedures to prevent an organization coming to harm. And as a society now, and I think that's amazing because it's what you're doing is you're taking those lessons, you're taking what is in place to protect corporations and businesses and helping individuals, because if the same language can still apply, I think that is quite striking as to how similar those incidents and scenarios can be.
Yeah, I love this because this is something that we are going to really focus on over the next period of time. And one of the things I've never understood, given the amount of crime in this space, is how little understanding and shared intelligence there is about how these crimes work and how
Yeah.
these harms work. If you look at the cyber industry, we love a framework, we love a model, and you take something like MITRE as an example. So there's a framework of how your corporate network, a mobile device, or a critical national infrastructure could be targeted across the life cycle of an attack. And it's evidenced, it's coded. We all understand this attack is this attack, this attack is this attack, and this is how it might change over time and how you might spot it, how you might mitigate it, how you might respond to it. That doesn't exist for individuals. It just doesn't exist. Now, there's pockets of it. You know, a bank might have their idea of how phishing works over here. The police might have an idea of how this organized crime group works over here. But there isn't that shared tool which says, right, if you put a human being in the middle, here's the 45 different ways they come to harm. And here's the tradecraft at the reconnaissance stage compared to like this different stage over here. And so we are, as we speak, working on that exact model and creating a free public framework, which is data driven based on our, lots of data that says, here's the online harm we see, here's the tradecraft we see, and here's the demographics of the types of individuals who are being targeted at these various different stages. Because I fundamentally believe that if we can understand the problem properly and we can have a shared language around it, then we can start to look at solutions. And it's amazing how even one type of attack, I'm trying to think of a good example, but one type of attack can be called 10 different things in the same industry. There's so many different terms. The police call it one thing because it's crime-based. The banks call it something else. The regulator calls it something else. And it's mad because we're all talking about the same thing. And we've all got pockets of data that's not coming together to really understand how we can protect people. So I think a big part of our next 12, 18 months is going to be how can we use our insight data experience to build a framework that the community can build on. And that can hopefully become a tool that we all use to understand the threat to individuals and how we might protect them better in the first place.
That's phenomenal. And I'm very excited to see that because I think it's going to be so helpful. And for those listening to this podcast who are interested in what you're doing and they want to support you, how can we all, as individuals and organizations, support the Cyber Helpline and the work that you're doing?
So there's so many ways to get involved. There is, if you have time, and I know that a lot of people don't have time, but if you have time and you can volunteer, there are so many different ways to do that. Some of it is on the front line, supporting victims. Some of it is helping us with the technical side. We have an open source investigations team. We have an advice team who are looking at the new threats and working out what the right advice is. There's so many different ways to use your skills and expertise. There's donating. Like, money is the hardest thing in a charity. It's amazingly difficult to fund the Cyber Helpline. We don't have a big government contract that pays for the service. We have to kind of beg and borrow to keep it going. So donating always helps. Fundraising, like so many people will run a 10K, they'll do a walk, they might do an activity. Picking the Cyber Helpline as the charity that you might support is also great because it raises awareness as well as brings in funding. And we also have a real challenge of raising the profile of the Cyber Helpline. We've kind of been nervous about talking too much in case 5 million people come and use the service. That would be great and terrifying at the same time. But we're starting to get enough scale and size that we want to go and get the brand out there for two reasons. One, because we want more people to know we're here so they can come and use us. But also, so when they do come to our site or our services, they trust us. They've heard of us before. Because if you've just been scanned and someone says, go to this website and put all your details in, that's quite a big proposition if you don't have some sort of brand recognition. So, helping us raise awareness, share the comms and other things we're doing is great. But there's also a way for organizations to help us. And that might be through donations, it might be through running fundraising, it might be through sponsorship. Lots of organizations donate their expertise, whether that's endpoint security solutions or pen testing or whatever it is, and all the things we need to do for our own own security program. So if you think the mission is great, you like the cause, come and chat to us and there'll be a way that you can get involved or support in some form.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rory. And for everyone listening, there is going to be lots of links in the show notes of how you can get involved, how you can support the Cyber Helpline. And I guess my final question is, if, there's one thing today that you want someone listening to this podcast to take away, what would that be?
I think that there is expert help out there for individuals. And that sounds like a really easy, straightforward thing, but it is not something that has been true for a very long time. And we are now at a point where we have a team of experts in the cyber industry who can provide expert, impactful support to the general public. So if you fall victim, if someone you know falls victim, and you want to make sure they get the best opportunity to recover, then come and use the service and take advantage of that free help.
Amazing. Well, I think what you're doing at the Cyber Helpline is incredible, and it is needed, and it is such a valuable resource to our society. So thank you. And thank you for your time today to come on here and chat to us all. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you.
Great to chat. Thank you.
And that's a wrap. If you're like me, this conversation will stick with you because it's a reminder that cybercrime isn't just an IT problem. It's something that lands in people's lives in a very real and scary way. And what Rory and the team have built is an incredibly practical lifeline for individuals and sole traders who don't know where to turn. So if you take one thing from this episode, let it be this. If you or someone you know is dealing with digital fraud, cybercrime, or online harm, you don't have to handle it alone. The Cyber Helpline offers free expert support, and I'll include the details in the show notes of how you can get in touch with them and also how you can support them. If you found this episode valuable, please follow or subscribe to the podcast, and then maybe also share the episode with someone you think might need it. Thank you again for listening, and I hope to see you next time.